This week on Vaticano, we follow Pope Francis on his pilgrimage to the burial sites of two 20th century Italian priests whose commitment to the poor challenged the lives of many. Stay with us to discover why Pope Francis has postponed a possible trip to South Sudan and learn more about the Patron Saints of Rome. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. During the Angelus prayer on Sunday, June the 25th, Pope Francis reminded the faithful that following Christ doesn't mean that life will be free from all earthly troubles.
There is no Christian mission in the name of tranquility. Difficulties and tribulations are part and parcel of evangelization, and we are called to find in them the chance to verify the authenticity of our faith and of our relationship with Jesus.
Pope Francis reflected on Sunday's Gospel, in which Jesus tells his disciples not to be afraid.
Even in our day, dear brothers and sisters, persecution against Christians still exists. Let us pray for our brothers and sisters who are persecuted, and praise the Lord because, in spite of this, they continue to witness their faith with courage and fidelity.
After the Angelus prayer, the Holy Father offered his prayers and closeness to the people of the Chinese town of Xinmo, which was hit by a landslide caused by heavy rains. The Holy Father also appealed for peace in Ukraine and greeted pilgrims of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church gathered in St. Peter's Square, celebrating the 150th anniversary of the canonization of St. Josephat. On Thursday, June the 22nd, the Holy Father received in audience the royal family from the Netherlands. His Majesty King Willem-Alexander was accompanied by his wife, Her Majesty Queen Maxima. Queen Maxima has something in common with the Pope. She too was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she studied at the Pontifical University. The discussion was centered on themes such as the protection of the environment and the fight against poverty. Particular attention was also paid to the phenomenon of migration, underscoring the importance of the peaceful coexistence between different cultures and a joint commitment to the promotion of peace and global security. The King and Queen brought the Pope a big bouquet of tulips, of which the Holy Father said that they derived directly from the heart. For his part, the Pope gave copies of some of his writings and a medallion with the history of St. Martin of Tours.
Dear friends, I am pleased to greet you, the members and directors of the American Pro Football Hall of Fame, and to welcome you to the Vatican. As many of you know, I am an avid follower of football, although where I come from, the game is played very differently.
And indeed, no one can deny that our Argentinian Pope is a fan of a more traditional kind of football, also known as soccer, while he also admits that American football is a sport with great values. The Holy Father greeted the members of the NFL's Hall of Fame delegation on Wednesday, June the 22nd, and thanked them for their work in building a culture of encounter.
Our world, and especially our young people, need models. Persons who show us how to bring out the best in ourselves, to use our God-given gifts and talents, and in so doing, to point the way to a better future for our societies.
At the end of the meeting, the members of the NFL gave the Pope a signed jersey and a helmet. This latter the Holy Father jokingly called his new bishop's mitre. Thank you very much. On Tuesday, June the 20th, Pope Francis made a pilgrimage to the graves of two 20th century Italian priests whose commitment to the poor challenged the lives of many faithful. The Pope arrived by helicopter in the city of Bozzolo, a small Italian town located in Lombardy, in the northern part of the country. After greeting the local Catholic community, the Holy Father gave a short prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. and later before the tomb of Father Primo Mazzolari. Father Mazzolari was the parish priest of Bozzolo. He was a scholar, an anti-fascist activist, and a defender of the poor. The diocesan process for his beatification will start, as announced by Bishop Antonio Napoleoni, on September the 18th.
I am a pilgrim here in Bozzolo and then in Barbiana, following the footsteps of two parish priests who left a luminous trace, if somewhat inconvenient, in their service to the Lord and the people of God. Several times I have said that the parish priests are the strength of the Church in Italy, and I repeat it. When they are the faces of a non-clerical clergy, like this man, they give life to a true magisterium of parish priests, which can do good to everyone.
The Holy Father said that the example of this honest service to the Church of Christ is not a singular exception, but a splendid fruit of the community. At the end of his speech, the Holy Father offered a prayer for all the pastors with the words of Father Mazzolari.
You came for everyone, for those who believe and for those who say they do not believe. All of them, sometimes these more than those, they work, they suffer, they hope for the world to go a little bit better. O Christ, you were born outside the house and you died out of the city, to be in an even more visible way the crossroads and the meeting point. No one is excluded from salvation, O Lord, because no one is excluded from your love, which does not offend or recoil from our oppositions and our denials.
Next, the Pope visited the city of Barbiana, near Florence. Here, the pontiff paid tribute to the tomb of another great example of a good Catholic parish priest, Father Lorenzo Milani. Father Milani was a great educator of youth and was very attentive to the needs of the poor and the rights of workers.
You are all witnesses to how a priest has lived out his mission in the places in which he was called by the Church with full fidelity to the gospel, and precisely for this, with full fidelity to each of you, whom the Lord had entrusted to him. And you're also witnesses of his teaching passion, of his intent to reawaken the human side of men and women and show them the way to heaven.
The Holy Father remembered that the school, for Father Lorenzo, was not something different from his priestly mission, but the concrete way to show youth the way to rise up to heaven.
Give to the poor the word, because without the word there is no dignity, and therefore no freedom and no justice. This is what Don Milani teaches us, and it is the word of God that will open up the path to full citizenship in society, through work and through full membership in the Church, with sincere faith.
Pope Francis said that this is true in our own times as well, in which sometimes the mere fact of possessing the Word can give us discernment between evil and good, and thus stand on the side of justice. Pope Francis may have made a pilgrimage to the tombs of two simple parish priests, but their pastoral work shines as an example to all the ministers of the Catholic Church.
Figlio e Spirito Santo.
Thanks for watching. In a few moments, we'll bring you an inside look at the papal mission to the United Nations. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
Honduras, Guatemala and El Salvador, known as the Northern Triangle of Central America, is rated by UN agencies as one of the most dangerous areas in the world. The Northern Triangle is also one of the most insecure areas in the world, with extreme high rates of poverty and violence stemming from organized crime groups and gangs. In order to solve this phenomenon, it is necessary to make changes in the countries of origin, the destructive economical systems that are stealing the resources in the countries, and that impoverishes the people, violating their most fundamental rights, thus triggering violence and a mass exodus. On June 15th, at the UN Geneva, in order to raise awareness of the tragedy in Central America, Caritas Internationalis, Franciscans International, LAS 72, International Catholic Migration Commission and the Latin American Asylum Access arranged this panel entitled "Immigrants are not a danger, they are in danger."
The position of the Holy Father from the very beginning of migrant crisis was that the Catholic Church should accept this phenomenon as a normal phenomenon, as a dramatic phenomenon, as a shock phenomenon, but with the openness. Accept, promote, integrate people coming to be our neighbors in the future. And we have to accept that migration is part of modern life and will continue, always been with us and will continue. And we, as a church, as a faith-based organizations, I would say as every human being of goodwill, we have to take this seriously in consideration.
Though dramatically increased, migration in the region is not new and started already in the 1970s. Today, annually about 500,000 people are estimated to flock only to the southern border of Mexico to enter into the United States. Unless the root causes that prompt this mass exodus of people in Central America are eliminated, building a wall and any plans to stop and deport people will not end migratory flows. In 2014, approximately 69,000 children coming from the Northern Triangle arrived in the US without being accompanied.
And what is worsening and what is worrying for Caritas is especially the increased numbers leaving the country to join their families in the US, but this is becoming an issue of concern for us, especially because there is lack of protection for these minors who risk to get in the hands of the coyotes, which are people trafficking human beings and especially children.
I think right now we need to push the migratory reform with a human face. We say that, no? We have human face. This is very important. But then we need to work without the government and especially with the private initiative in our countries to resolve the problems of poverty. So there are two kinds of actions. Migratory reform with human face and also change of the economical and social structures in our countries.
The purposes of the event were especially to request from the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights of Migrants a visit to the Northern Triangle, and especially sharing the plans of the Catholic Church to guarantee protection and respect for migrants, both in their country of origin or in transit, as well as in the country of destination.
The impression is that the action of international community could stop this phenomenon and we will have something else. But the experience from the past shows that this phenomenon is going to continue. I think this is why it's important not only to change, to protect the borders, everything important for the states, and they have the duty to do that. But it's also a necessity that we change, no? That we have to go through a transformation to the new culture of acceptance, capacity to live together with the others and see how we can elaborate in our new environment, always in collaboration and together as our neighbors, people who came to stay with us.
Since December of 2013, South Sudan has been struggling with a brutal civil war that has caused deep humanitarian crisis in the country. The war broke out because of ethnic divisions between the Dinkas group and the Nuers group. In a population of 12 million people, around 300,000 have been killed and more than 3 million have been displaced. The Holy See has been watching the situation very closely. South Sudan is a predominantly Christian country with a Catholic majority and a Catholic president. Last February, the Holy Father put forward the possibility that he might be visiting the country in a joint trip with the Anglican leader, Justin Welby. However, on Wednesday, June the 21st, the Vatican announced that due to the dangerous conditions in the country, the Pope's trip had been cancelled. Instead, the Holy See has launched an aid project called the Pope for South Sudan. The program will be coordinated through the Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development, headed by Cardinal Peter Turkson and by Caritas Internationalis.
The Holy Father stays very close to the situation in South Sudan to try to be ourselves, to be paternal to the situation over there and try to offer all the help that he can.
In February, parts of South Sudan were declared to be under conditions of famine. The Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, Michel Roy, says that the situation is getting worse every day.
The people of South Sudan are dying of hunger, of famine. And because there is no food and because we cannot bring food to them because of insecurity. So it's the worst that can happen. And in February we spoke of 100,000 people who are going to die of hunger. Now we think it may be 1 million. So it's worsening.
The Pope for South Sudan program is a concrete action from the Holy Father to help the South Sudanese people.
And what the Pope is doing now is to raise again the attention of the international community through a very concrete act, which is giving to a hospital, giving to schools, and giving to Caritas for food. In this case, 200,000 euros, which will go to help displaced people to produce foods in their surroundings. Quick crops, 1 month, they can eat what they have produced.
And even though it might seem just a drop in the ocean, the Pope's aid is important because of the concrete help it will give. In order then to help South Sudan finally overcome its difficulties, an immediate aid intervention by the whole international community is needed.
But the Pope's action with giving money is also a call to the international community to bring what is necessary in terms of humanitarian assistance. Save lives needs money, and the UN have launched an appeal which is only half funded, so the other half has to be found. It's a lot of money, but we cannot just sit and look at people dying.
This should not be presented as the only and the first time the Holy Father is showing interest in the situation in Sudan. Because as I said, I've made 2 visits already there. And all of these visits, if you want, by the dicastery of the Holy See, represent something that reflects the interest of the Holy Father in the situation in South Sudan.
Humanitarian aid will help people survive during the crisis, but a long-term peace will only be achieved when the fighters start to talk. Last year, Pope Francis welcomed representatives of the various Christian denominations of South Sudan here in Rome. Since then, the Dicastery for Integral Human Development has been working on establishing bridges and dialogue. In a few moments, you'll discover more about the Patron Saints of Rome on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now. On June the 29th, Rome celebrates the patron saints of the city, Saints Peter and Paul. The feast was established in order to commemorate the martyrdom of these 2 pillars of the Catholic Church. It's always been usual in Christian art to represent the 2 saints together. Proof of this is that at the Sant'Angelo Bridge in Rome, it's both saints who welcome pilgrims into the Vatican. Their mutual connection is also visible in the fact that both basilicas in their names, St. Peter and St. Paul's, display identical statues of the two. We met with Elizabeth Lev, an art historian, to discover more about these two saints through the architecture of Rome.
One of the most important points about these two basilicas is this twinship between Peter and Paul. In Rome, as you know, we celebrate June 29th as one of our biggest holidays of the year, and we celebrate it as the day that Peter and Paul were both killed. And as a matter of fact, you see the images within the church of the beheading of St. Paul, the crucifixion of St. Peter, celebrated. They're always placed side by side, celebrated on the same day, because as the two apostles died here, they were born together in heaven. And that makes them twins. And for a city that loves twins, we were founded by Romulus and Remus. These new twin martyrs would be the ones that would refound the Christian city. And that is emphasized not only in the matching statues, but when the emperors rebuilt this church in the 5th century, they turned it. So no longer does it face like St. Peter's, like all the other churches. It doesn't face east. It faces west. It faces St. Peter's. So the two of them look at each other. The two brothers embrace across the city in the very urban planning of the two churches.
The celebration of the Patron Saints of Rome begins on the evening of June the 28th in the Vatican Basilica, when the statue of St. Peter is dressed as a pontiff. The feast continues with the Vespers the next day at the Basilica of St. Paul.
A very, very important appointment in this year, and with this church every year, is the time of June 29th, when we have the Vespers for the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul, which take place here. As a matter of fact, this church has been charged for all sorts of ecumenical activities and initiatives. That's the job of this church, really. And so from the Week of Christian Unity, where that's featured very heavily, but perhaps the most beautiful moment of the year is when the Pope comes, usually with a representative of the Eastern Church. They pray together at the tomb of St. Paul.
The New Testament is our main source as to the lives of these two great apostles. However, the Holy Scriptures don't say when or how either St. Peter or St. Paul died. To find out more about their martyrdoms, we need to go inside the two churches bearing their names.
This is a site that started out as a tomb. It started out as a place of sadness and mourning. When St. Paul was killed, somewhere between 65 and 67, his body was brought back to a piece of property belonging to a woman who had been one of his followers. Her name was Lucina, and she owned a piece of property right here, a stone's throw from the Tiber and on the Via Ostiense, two main passages for the city. And the body was placed into what we're assuming was a fairly simple, very simple hole in the ground, with a few years later perhaps some sort of memorial placed on top of it so that the first few pilgrims would be able to find the tomb of St. Paul. And then from there, with the moment of the legalization of Christianity, it blossomed into something greater and greater and greater.
Some skeptics don't believe that the remains of St. Paul are really present in the basilica. But on December the 6th, 2006, Vatican archaeologists confirmed the existence of a white marble sarcophagus beneath the altar and attributed it to St. Paul. The authenticity of the remains of St. Peter has also been confirmed. On June the 26th, 1968, Pope Paul VI announced that the relics of St. Peter had been identified.
What happened with the tomb of St. Peter is that Peter was simply buried in a hole in the ground. He was executed in a horse racing circus, and being a pauper, in a state of very, very violent persecution. The best his friends could do would be to take the body out of the horse racing circus, bring it to the first quiet space, dig a hole in the ground, put the body in it, cover it with some dirt, and cover it with some pieces of brick. And the amazing part of this story, and everything you see flowering behind it, is that this is the moment that the Romans finally made a mistake. It was the moment when it seemed that they had crushed out the Christians, they had rid themselves of this Christian presence, but actually inadvertently, throwing that body in the hole in the ground, thinking they had taken out the trash, the Romans planted a seed. And we look at the flowering of that seed every time we look at the basilica, because the basilica is sitting directly on top of that tomb. If you start from the orb at the very top of that dome and drop a line down, it will drop through 2,000 years of history, through monuments and altars and makeshift walls, all the way down to the hole in the ground where the Romans first made the mistake of discarding that stone, which is Peter.
By following the gospel, Saints Peter and Paul became the founders of a new Rome and a new church, thus completely changing the course of human history. Join us next week on Vaticano and watch our special Jubilee 300th episode with the best pieces of Vaticano. Thanks for watching.